How many of you out there even knew that we have such a thing as for-profit foster care? That there are companies that trade on the New York Stock Exchange whose revenue model is housing children in warehouses or group homes and extracting the profit off the top. The difference between what the state pays to take care of a foster kid and then what the company spends in order to keep that kid alive. Well, this is America. We do have such a thing as a for-profit foster care system. It's something that the Senate Finance Committee, in a bipartisan fashion, spent the last 2 years investigating. They reached out to all 50 states and the District of Columbia to find out what is regulation like and what kind of product is being delivered in these states that have these for-profit foster care systems. Now, 17 of the states over a 2-year period didn't even respond to the repeated congressional inquiries, which gives you some indication of just how seriously they're taking their oversight role if they're completely ignoring Congress. So when the Senate panel released its report, they zeroed in on the largest foster care company, which trades under the ticker symbol CIVI, V as in Victor. You can look up their stock price if you want. Civitas Solutions, the owner of what's known as the Mentor Network. What they found is that over the last decade, 86 children had died in the care of the Mentor Network. Many of them died unexpectedly, and even when they died unexpectedly, the Mentor Network did not carry out internal investigations into how they died. Not only that, and this may have been the most poignant thing that came out of this report, oftentimes the case files didn't even have the autopsies connected with them. That's how little care was given to the lives of these children who lived and died in this system that was built to profit off of them. And then when they were no longer around on this planet, they couldn't even bother to put the autopsy in their now closed case file. The Senate panel put this investigation out because they're trying to get support for 2 pieces of legislation that are, the one was on the brink of passing at the end of last year and was stopped by one senator from North Carolina, and the other was introduced in conjunction with the publication of this report. The first one's called the Family First Prevention Services Act. Tries to do one major thing, and that's to kind of flip the foster care system right side up. Like right now, the incentives in the foster care system are all backwards, whether you're talking cultural, political, or financial. You know, these group homes, these warehouses that keep children, they don't start making money until a kid is yanked out of a parent's house. If you're a caseworker or you're a judge and it's your decision of whether or not to take a kid out of a parent's home, the incentives are all toward action, to taking the kid out, because the media freaks out if a tragedy strikes when Child Protective Services is aware that a child is in a difficult situation and did not remove the child from that family. And so the judges and the caseworkers and the others are trying to prevent themselves from getting written about as people who didn't take action. But when they take action, what are they doing? They're removing this kid from a family situation, generally putting them into a group home situation in which often the kids are far worse off. And when tragedy strikes in these group homes, you often don't have the same media reaction. And we can ask ourselves why that is. And I think culturally, that we are just much more comfortable as people judging parents and more comfortable doing that than we are thinking about the abstractions of a child dying in a group home setting where we kind of all collectively have put them there. And so we wind up with this system where these group homes are making between $4,000 and $5,000 a month per child while hiring very low wage labor, spending very little money on them, and they're getting extremely poor care as a result.
Jess Mendez sounds like she's in Texas. She's very concerned about what's happening there. She said there have been 20 kids who've died, and she wanted to voice her support for the Family First bill.
Thanks, Jess, for let us know what's going on in Texas if you want to put any links in the comment section there. A little more on the bill. This has been an effort spearheaded mainly by Republican Orrin Hatch from Utah, and as you can imagine, there's actually a very kind of conservative element to the reform that they're trying to bring to the foster care system. In other words, family values, they always talk about family values. So if you can keep the kid with the family then that satisfies that Christian box right there of family values. It also saves money. It's much cheaper to give support to a family to stay together than it is to pull the kid out or the kids out. Let's say there's 3 or 4. Then you're talking $20,000 a month to put them in these warehouses. So you can both keep families together and you can save taxpayer money, both things that conservatives like to do. From the liberal side, liberals want things that work for kids and that work for families. So you have a lot of Democratic support for this too. Ron Wyden is the top-ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee, so he and Orrin Hatch together did this. They almost got it done in the lame duck as part of a huge package at the end of 2016 that was going through, but one senator, Richard Burr from North Carolina, stood up and, well, he didn't stand up, he very quietly objected to it. It was only through some reporting that it emerged that he was the one who had objected to it, and he objected to it at the behest of this network of Baptist group homes in North Carolina who were making $4,000 to $5,000 per kid that they were taking care of, and they didn't want to see their revenue stream diminish.
Let me guess, was the argument we're making them good Baptists or good Christians?
They didn't even make the argument. They just said
we need the money?
They said we're doing good work for these kids and leave the kids with us.
Jason Evans.
But there's nobody that thinks that the best setting for a kid is in one of these kind of neo-orphanages.
We've got a couple people who have talked about surviving foster care. If you have a specific question for them, why don't you tell them, and then I'll go back and see what they say. But first, Jason Evans, in 2 comments, he mentions the private prison industry as an analogy. And he says, well, don't you know, sarcastically, that privatization solves everything? Anytime you can put profit into human services, it always works out just great.
Yeah, sure does. When you start to think about these questions in terms of profit, rather than in terms of what's best for the kids, then you get answers like the ones that we have. You get kids yanked out of homes and put in these settings where you have any number of kids often in a rural area where the cost of the housing is extremely cheap, the cost of the labor is extremely cheap, so they're spending a very small amount of money per month on these children and then billing the state at, like I said, $4,000 to $5,000 per child. Let's say you have 6 of them in a small house. You wind up making an extraordinary amount of money off of these children, and the people running these programs take home lucrative salaries.
Okay, so Vivian did respond. She said that the problem was that you touched upon this in the article, that they also place people with parents that aren't properly vetted and can sometimes be abusive or incompetent as guardians.
She's exactly right. And when they say family first, they don't mean that kind of family. What they mean is the actual family, not a newly created family. There are some people who are guardian ad litems in the foster care world who are saints, who are really doing tremendous work for children. There are other people who are just in it for the cash that you get from the state, and they badly mistreat the foster kids who are in their care. And as a result of that, a lot of these kids grow up not trusting anybody because everybody in their life was just using them one way or another, whether it's the for-profit system, whether it was the family that took them in just for the money and treated them poorly, whether it was the caseworkers who didn't care about them or who seemed not to care about them and just turned over constantly, because that's another thing you see. It's low wage and it's emotionally draining work, and so you have an extraordinary amount of turnover. And so just as a kid is getting attached to a caseworker, the caseworker's gone.
Jamie said her mother was working in an organization that was the first stop for children that were ripped away, that's the term Jamie used, from their families, and her mother just couldn't believe how easy it was to take these children away from their parents.
Right. I mean, hopefully there's no caseworkers watching. I'm sure if you observed my life for a month, you could like manufacture reasons to take my children away. It's kind of that easy. You take a few things out of context that a parent did. You take a few things that a child said. I hate you. I've probably been told that by my children that they hate me, a couple times in the last month. They don't mean it. You know, but if you rip these things out of context and you put them in a document that you put before a judge, then you can kind of manipulate the process to get to the outcome that you want. And these are extremely vulnerable people. And we haven't even talked yet about the interplay here between the opioid epidemic and this. You know, there are some 30 million people who are in recovery right now, and that doesn't count the ones who are still using. So those 30 million people, you know, many of them lost their children during their time that they spent in addiction, and even now that they're in recovery, it's extremely hard for them to get their children back. And you know, and it also is it's a reason, the whole foster care system and CPS is a reason for people not to get treatment. You know, if you know, once you admit that you have a problem, the chances of you losing your children are very high.
Here's some accounts from Vivian. She just kind of lists things: sexual abuse, torture, starvation, bullying, being ignored and feeling not like a person, and being told to just stay away, stay outside of the house.
Right, and you'll find a lot of this in the Senate report too. This is, you know, this is not controversial what Vivian's saying, and yeah, and it's heartbreaking for these foster children who, you know, many of them they think they may have finally found a home where they're taken in, but the family that has taken them in makes it very clear: no, you're here for the paycheck that we're taking. Just stay away from us.
Tyler would like to know about the monetary figure. You might have mentioned it, but he was saying, is that per month or per year?
Per month. It's not uncommon for a group home to get $4,000 to $5,000 a month per child.
And this is coming from state governments, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's so many of these stories.
A lot of federal matching money, though.
Okay, so many of these stories are about basically these profiteers who look at where the government is going to spend money. It's a predictable source, and there's a huge you know, amount of resources to put toward it.
Right. And if you have 10 kids in a group home, you know, that's $40,000 to $50,000 a month. So you're talking $600,000 a month. I mean, $600,000 a year of revenue that house is generating. Now you have 2 or 3 people that work in it at $20,000, $30,000 a year each. So now, you know, now you're less than $100,000 on that. You're out in the country somewhere, so your rent for the place is $1,000 a month. Your food is another $1,000 a month. You know, you're talking about expenses of $100,000 to $150,000 and revenue of $500,000 to $600,000. That's just the one that we're ballparking here, but that's a huge profit on just one little house of 10 kids. So yeah, that's how you wind up where we are.
I mean, isn't that how Trump's dad got rich? He figured out where the government was going to spend money on public housing, and then he took all that money.
And he doesn't, and you don't fix anything, and right, yeah.
And then he flouted the civil rights laws. Denise Joy is saying that she's actually fostered a number of children, but not for profit. And there was some suffering, but there was a lot of love and a lot of growing that took place. So can you just close it out and remind people that there actually is a bipartisan fix?
Right, yeah. So there's a bipartisan bill called Family First Prevention Services Act. It passed unanimously in the House of Representatives, and it nearly passed unanimously in the Senate in 2016, but it was hung up by Richard Burr and there was Tom Tillis he said, but I'm not really against it. He was just kind of joining Richard Burr. When you'd press him on it, he'd say, I'm kind of okay with it. Barbara Boxer did not play a heroic role in that. She held it up for a while earlier in 2016. Democrat who's no longer in the Senate. So it's not a partisan issue. It's more of a can they actually get it together to pass something when there's no commercial or campaign cash benefit for the Senate to do it. It'll be instructive to see if there's some pressure from people out there. That certainly helps. So, you know, call your member of Congress and tell them that you want them to reform this foster care service. And you know, to the viewer who said that, you know, she had taken in foster kids and she didn't make any money for it, there are many like her, and it's wonderful. You're doing the Lord's work, whether you're an atheist or not, when you're doing that. And you know, if you can, you should. Others out there should look into doing that, because you know, not all kids can be kept with their parents, and there's also the issue of kids when they get orphaned, and we're seeing more than 150 people a day die in the opioid epidemic. Many of them have children, so the opioid epidemic is going to spark a further foster care crisis that we're going to be dealing with for an entire generation.
So if Orrin Hatch cares about the opioid epidemic, you should make the point to him that the two things are related, and maybe he'll get on the right side of that one.
Yeah, maybe. In fact, drug treatment providers could be a big beneficiary of this foster care bill, because it would encourage a lot of people who are resisting treatment to go into treatment.